grab your Bibles out and be opening up to the book of Matthew, chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. We're going to be looking specifically at the last part of this chapter today, Matthew chapter 9, looking from verses 35 through 38. And while you're turning over there, I want to run something by you that I'm sure has happened to probably all of us. Is it possible to look and not really see? Or as husbands, maybe the question may be, is it possible to listen but not really hear? You can be listening, but maybe not really hearing. You can be looking and not necessarily see exactly what you're looking for. I think we probably do it all the time when it comes to remotes. I know I did it this morning with my keys. We probably do it all the time. You know, you're looking around and you're looking right at something, but you're not really looking and seeing. It's possible to be looking and not truly see what there is to see. And I want to direct your attention to Matthew chapter 9, and specifically one verse there in particular as we begin this morning. And we're going to look at this through the eyes of Jesus. And I have a specific question for you that as you read verse number 36 with me of Matthew chapter 9, to ask, what exactly did Jesus see? What do we see looking through the eyes of Jesus? In Matthew chapter 9, looking in verse number 36, we read, "But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd." Now, I want to stop there for a moment and have you consider something with me, that of all of the people there, and remember at this point in Matthew chapter 9, we're gaining an audience that's following Jesus around. And they're following him around, and we're seeing the number of people that are around Jesus and a multitude of the crowds beginning to really gain. We're seeing a lot of people around him. And so Jesus is looking out at the crowd. He's looking out at the multitude. And the question is, what exactly does he see as he's looking at these people? Now, we know for a fact, and it's not said specifically here in this text, but we know for a fact what other people thought as they look around the multitudes that are around Jesus. We know that his disciples look at that, and some of them think, well, that's a lot more work. We know the scribes and Pharisees are looking at the audience in front of Jesus at times, and they're saying, look at this bunch of misfits and sinners that's following him around. I mean, should they be disgraced? We think of politicians and maybe ruthless businessmen thinking, well, what an audience there. We can make a lot of money off of them. And you think of all the different ways that are being looked at. But if we had been there and we had been looking at the same crowd or the same audience that is in front of Jesus, what exactly is it that we may see? And I ask ourselves the question because sometimes we lose perspective on what it is that we're actually to be looking at and to be looking towards. And whether that is from the perspective of what we're looking at within the church or outside of it, today we're going to focus on what we need to be looking at and truly seeing through the eyes of Jesus. I remember there's a very old comic strip where there's a preacher and he's standing in front of the church building and he's holding a Bible and he looks in the comic strip like he's scared to death. He's cowering in the corner. And the reason he's cowering over in the corner in front of the church building is there's a very large and aggressive lady in front of him berating him. And the list goes on of the things that she's telling him. And she's saying things like, what are you talking about? There's no juice bar. There's no tanning salon. There's no gymnasium. And you really call yourself a house of worship. And I think back, and sometimes the perspective is, what do you and I see when we look at the church? Do we look at it with the perspective of, what can the church do for me? What can this place do for me? Or do we look at it through the eyes of Jesus and we say, what can I do for the church? Whenever we look back and we understand a little bit about the character of Jesus, one of the things that we are repeatedly reminded of is that as we live our life, we are walking after the example that Jesus set before us. In John chapter 13 and verse number 15, he says very plainly, he says, "For I have given you an example that ye should do as I have done to you." And he gives us this perspective of, here is the example that I'm setting for you. Now it is up to you to follow it. So I want you to look back in Matthew chapter 9, and let's read the entire thing in verses 35 down to the end of that chapter. I want you to look here, beginning in verse number 35, and ask yourself the question, what does Jesus see? Beginning in verse 35, we read, "And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad, as sheep having no shepherd. Then saith he unto his disciples, The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. Now, stop there at the end of the chapter through verse 38. And let's break down and see exactly what Jesus saw. The first thing we point out that we see in verse number 35 as we open up the setting is he saw the needs of the people. And really, as we look specifically here, we see that he finds and sees and seeks out their spiritual needs. As you read there in verse number 35, he's going and he's going to all the cities and villages. He's teaching in their synagogues. And what is he doing? He is preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Not only that, but it goes on to say that he is healing every sickness and every disease among the people. And as you and I look at that, we say, of all of the different perspectives we may have of the crowd that is following Jesus, of all of the frustration that people around him had for what these people are after and what they want, he's looking at them and he's seeing that there is a need. And the need specifically at this point is they need to hear the truth. And you notice there in verse number 35, he is dedicating his time. He's going around to cities. He's going to synagogues. He is preaching. He is healing every sickness and every disease among the people. And I want you to think of the perspective here that he is teaching us about. Not once does it say he looks at them and he asks the question of how can they help me? How can they further my cause? No, he looks at them and the one thing he is most concerned about is fulfilling their needs. He is looking at them and answering, and he's saying, this is what I can do for you. As you and I live our lives, do we go around and ask, well, what can be done for me? As we see the church, what can be done for me? Or do we look around and say, how can I help? When we got up this morning, we got prepared, and we came, was it with the attitude of, I hope I can get something out of this today? Or was it the attitude of, what can I give today? As far as my attitude, as far as my journey in life and adding to hopefully the encouragement of those people around me, what can I give today? What do people truly need? Well, in verse number 36, and this breaks our heart at what he is saying, he looks around and he says, and he sees the multitude, and I want you to look at the word that's used there when it talks about what he thinks and what he feels. It says that he is moved with compassion on them. He's looking around and almost in a way, it kind of breaks his heart on what he's saying. And he's moved with compassion to do something, and we know why. Because it says, because they fainted, they're scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. He said, he breaks his heart. Here they are, they're wandering around. They don't have any direction. You look and think about them spiritually, and what he's seeing there is they're just kind of floating around. And as he sees them and has compassion on them, he says, I am going to do something. And so the question is, in our thinking and our approach to life, what do we ask? Do we ask, what can we do for others? Or what can others do for me? What is it exactly that we ask? As you read back and understand, in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse number 7, and I bring this up specifically because in this passage it talks about what we ought to be doing. And I think back to passages like this in Matthew chapter 9, because in 1 Peter 5:7 it says, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. And this isn't talking about Jesus. We say, does Jesus truly care? Well, he absolutely cares. He cares about each and every one of us. And he cares most importantly of all about the spiritual needs of the people. Open up to Philippians chapter 2 for a moment. As you read Philippians chapter 2, this has an interesting perspective on it. Philippians chapter 2 and verses 1 through 4, and then ask ourselves the question of what can we do for others? How can we help others? In Philippians chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, it says, the elders which are among you I exhort, who am also an elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being ensamples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive the crown of glory that fades not away, through the end of verse 4. And he's talking specifically here to the elders. He's saying this is what we should be seeking after as an eldership. This is what we should be doing. And he's looking at the needs of the people. And verse number 2 specifically is there. He's looking at the church. He's saying, feed the flock of God. Give them and help them along with their spiritual needs. And so as Christians, we say, well, what can we truly do for others? What can we truly do to help others out? Well, Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 tells us that. And one side of this, it says, Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. If I am looking to the needs of others, if I am looking through the eyes of Jesus, and I see one of my brothers and sisters that has fallen down, or maybe they have fallen away, what should I be doing? Well, Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1 says, you go to them. You don't look at them and say, well, I'm sad about that. I hate that for them, but I've got to worry about myself. No, you go to them and you're concerned about their spiritual well-being. You're concerned about helping them along. You're concerned and asking the question of what can I do to help them? And then in verse number 2 of that same chapter, he says, bear ye one another's burdens. You know, Christianity is not a lone wolf religion. Never once does it talk about just white-knuckling it and bearing through it alone by ourselves. No, it's not what it's about. It's about, as the church, what can we be doing to help each other? And so the question is, what am I doing? What am I doing to help my brethren out? In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse number 16, it very simply says this, Hebrews 13 verse 16, but to do good and to communicate, forget not. He says, don't forget to do good. You know, the fundamental idea of our life as a Christian is to do good. You know, we ought to stand apart by our desire to do good. Not to try to gain unnaturally, not to try to abuse people, not to try to get something out of them. No, we are to forget not to do good. Through the eyes of Jesus, he looks at the needs of the people. At the end of verse 16 it says, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. And so you open up in this dialogue in verses 35 and 36. And he says here we have a multitude of people that's gathered around. And he sees in them the needs that they possess. Do we see the needs of our fellow man? Do we see the needs of our brethren? As you continue reading on, notice the next thing that he sees in verse number 37. He goes on and he says this as he's looking out over the crowd that's following him, over the multitude. And it says, he tells his disciples this in verse 37. The harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. You know, as you consider what he sees in looking at the multitude, he looks around and he sees potential. He sees the spiritual needs and he sees the potential of what can happen if we will look at their potential and look at their needs and give them what they need most, which is the truth. You know, as Jesus goes through his ministry and as he is leaving us and as he is going back and ascending back into heaven, before that happens, as you look at the Great Commission and what he tells us to do and what he's telling the apostles specifically to do there, Matthew chapter 28 and verse number 19, he says, go ye therefore. There is something that they must do. He said, it doesn't say, sit around, wait for them to come to you. No, he says, go ye therefore. What does he say to do? Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. He says, you go after them. There is potential there. And he sees the potential of the people. If I am looking through the eyes of Jesus, I am looking at the potential. You know, he's not looking at the crowd in verse 37. And he's saying, I see a few of them that would probably be good candidates. I see a few of them that I think would believe. No, he looks at the multitude, and you know what every single one of them need, without any question, you know what every single person in the world today needs, without any question, is the truth of the gospel. And so he says in Matthew 28, in delivering the Great Commission, to go and teach. In Acts chapter 1, verse number 8, as we see here the charge that is given to the apostles, and he tells them what to do. He says in Acts 1, verse 8, but ye shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost part of the earth. They're to go out into the world. The potential is there. The harvest is there. Now it is our job to do something. And so as he's speaking to the apostles there in Acts chapter 1, he doesn't say, Y'all stay in Jerusalem and don't ever go anywhere past there, and they'll all come to do. You know, he says the potential is there. Now it's our job to go out into the world. Whenever you read Romans chapter 1, verse 16, we say, well, what should we take? What do we need to take if there's so much potential? And Paul says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. He says the only thing you need to take is the saving power of the gospel, the word of truth. That's what we take. The potential is there. It's up to you and I to do something about it. Now, I want you to look at this and open up to John chapter 4. John chapter 4, look at verses 35 to 39. So it's going to be the same perspective of what we have just read here. In one verse, in verse 37 of Matthew 9, we read, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. So keep that in your mind, and then go to John chapter 4, verses 35 and following. John chapter 4, and just read really verse 35 for now. He says, say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to the harvest. And as you read John 4, verse 35, you think for a second in our mind, you and I are blessed to live in an area where we understand how narrow your window is when it comes to the time of harvest, isn't it? If you're looking at the harvest, do you look at it and say, well, I've got 4 months. I've got plenty of time. Or is there a window where you had better get your equipment ready to go, because if you miss that window, you're going to go from harvest to withering. There's something we must do. He says there in verse number 35 of John 4, he says, don't think in 4 months, well, then the harvest comes. He says, no, it's white. It's ready now. And so as you read back in Matthew chapter 9, verse 37, he's looking at it, he's saying, it is ripe for the harvest now. He sees the potential that is there. And so what exactly is it that we need to see? Well, we need to see the multitude. And back in Matthew chapter 9, you notice it says whenever he lift up his eyes, as he is looking after them, he looks around and he sees the multitude. And you know, he sees the reality that is setting in. You know what the reality is? Romans 3:23 tells us, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The reality is this: people need the gospel of Christ. People need to hear about the truth, because without the truth, people are lost. We need to see the multitude, and we need to seize the moment. That's why he says there in verse 35 of John 4, he says, don't be saying we have time to wait. Don't be saying when a more convenient season comes. No, the harvest is white now. It is time for me to go and to take advantage of it now. Seize the moment as we have it. You know, as you read there in Acts chapter 8, he's talking about whatever our job is, whatever our stage of life is, the moment is now to get involved. If we put it off too long, we'll miss that harvest, and we'll have time no more. In Acts chapter 8, verse number 4, I bring this to our attention because at this moment the church is experiencing heavy persecution, and they're experiencing hardship that's being placed upon them. And it says, as they are scattered abroad as a result of this persecution, Acts 8, verse 4, therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word. You know how the gospel spread in the early church? It spread as a result of persecution, because while they left where they were, they took the gospel with them and they spoke the truth. We need to seize the moment that no matter what we are doing, we need to stop now and find a way to get involved. We need to share the message. We need to share the message. As you go back to John chapter 4 and you read verse 39 of that chapter, it says, and many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him for the saying of the woman which testified, he told me all that I ever I did. And you think about the message being taught here. Everywhere we look, we see souls that are lost in sin. We see souls that are wandering around in darkness, that don't have the truth. And we see them, and the question is, what will we do about it? Romans 10:17 says, so then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. The job for you and I to do is to see the multitude, seize the moment, and share the message. But there is a tragedy that Jesus saw as well, because you know, as you go back into Matthew 9, he's looking around in verse 37. He says, look at the harvest. The fields are white. They're ready to go. But he looks at verse number 38 and it says, Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. Jesus saw the resources necessary to take advantage of the harvest. As you read verse number 38, and you understand the resources that it says that we have, the first word there in verse number 38 is to pray. Do you and I pray that we are able to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves to share the word? Because in Matthew 9, verse 38, it says, pray ye therefore. In Matthew 7, verse 7, just a couple of chapters ago, Jesus says, ask and it shall be given you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. And you'll also notice, what else did he see? Well, he saw the avenue that we have of prayer, but he also saw laborers. He saw workers. In Matthew chapter 4, verse number 18 and 19, here's the workers that he saw. You know, you and I, if we were there that day, and we're standing there with Jesus, and we're looking at the same thing that he is looking after, we might have the perspective of, boy, somebody needs to get after that. Somebody does need to take advantage of that. But the point is, in verse number 38, is that you and I, I need to take advantage of the harvest. That I am one of those laborers. I am one of those workers. Back in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 and 19, we need to make it personal here, because we read there of Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he saith unto them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. At that moment, can you imagine what both Peter and Andrew could have done? Well, I'm busy. It's just now time for the season. I've got to take advantage of it while the time is good. He says there's more important things to attend to than just worrying about the physical life we have. See that the laborers that he is talking about in verse 38, it is not talking about exclusively preachers. And it's not talking about exclusively elders or deacons. No, it is talking about Christians. The laborers that he is looking at belong to you and me. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6 and 7, it reminds us that there is work that all of us can do for the same goal. And that all of us have in our minds. If we have the same goal in mind, it does not matter who it is that converts, as long as we are going after that goal of sharing the gospel. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 and 7, it says, I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So that neither is he that planteth anything, neither he that watereth, but God that gives the increase. Whenever Jesus saw souls, he saw the resources necessary to be able to reach those souls. Friends, you and I today are the resources that he is looking at and seeing. You and I today are the laborers that he is looking out and seeing as the means to be able to go out into the world and to preach and teach the gospel of Christ. So as I'm looking out through the eyes of Jesus, you know, I can look in this world and I can look at the same thing that he saw, but perhaps not truly see. But if I look through the eyes of Jesus, what truly then do I see today? Well, I look around and I see the needs that are around us. That's what Jesus saw, wasn't it? He looked around and he saw the needs. He saw souls needing the truth there in verse 35 and 36. He saw potential. You notice he didn't place them into categories of, well, I think this person looks like they may listen, or this one, they should be a good one. No, he sees that all of them needed to hear the truth. He saw the potential. And then he saw the resources that are necessary. And so do we see that we are part of what he saw? As you read verse number 38, do we see that we are part of the solution that he is describing to meet it? You know, the saddest part is that if he will look in verse 37, he says, the harvest truly is plenteous, but there is one problem. The laborers are few. He says, look around you, we have so much work to do, and the only problem we have is we've got so much to harvest, but not enough laborers to do it. Pray that Lord of harvests, that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. Pray that you and I are looking around through the eyes of Jesus and seeing that today is the day The harvest is not next week. The harvest is not after everything calms down, because guess what? It never does. The harvest is today. And are we seeing through the eyes of Jesus that we have a job to do? I heard a story from a preacher one time that was going on a gospel meeting and stayed with a family there. They had a daughter that was probably about 20 or 21. And he noticed that she was dedicated to doing one thing, and that was sewing. No matter what he saw her doing, if she was not eating, studying, or working, she was sewing. And he spent the entire week with them, and she never put it down. She never complained. She was sewing and sewing and sewing. And so finally, the last day he was there, he asked her the question, don't you ever get tired of sewing? Isn't there something better you can do? And she looked at him and said, oh, no. See, this is for my wedding dress. Now, whenever we look at it, if what we do is out of love, then it's not really work at all, is it? If what we're looking at and doing as a Christian is out of love, and I look around and see the needs of the harvest, it's not work that I'm looking at. It's a need that is met. Do we truly love what we are doing? In Genesis chapter 29, verse number 20, if we serve God as Jacob served Rachel, can you imagine what we could accomplish? Because in Genesis 29, verse 20 says, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but for a few days, for the love he had to her. And that there is the key. That is how we will see through the eyes of Jesus, through love. So our question this morning is, won't you get involved in the work of the Lord? Won't we see it through the eyes of Jesus and show them the way to come to him? Or, if you are not a Christian, the place to begin is with Jesus. He came to this earth to die, to shed his blood on the cross, to wash away your sins. And you are part of the harvest there that he is speaking so lovingly and so important about. And so this morning, do we see the need that is around us, the potential that is all about us, and do we see that the only way for us to accomplish this job is for you and I to get involved? Today, let's see the need, and let's get involved. This morning, if we can help you in any way, please come forward to